All right, so we heard how difficult this issue is, and we're going to come up with a presentation by James Emery. James, or Jamie, I believe, is a professional geologist and senior hydrogeologist from New Hampshire who has over 1,600 groundwater investigation projects nationally and internationally, and has worked with the World Bank as well as the Pentagon. He came recommended to our summit from our good friend Ted Deers up in New Hampshire. I knew Jamie was the right person to come to Lake George to speak when my research into his background showed he was honored in 2019 for his work to protect groundwater in the New Hampshire's lake region with the Kim Ayers Award that recognizes residents who have made a major voluntary contribution to the environmental quality of the lakes region. So with that, James Emery.
These lights are bright. I want to thank the Lakes George Association because you guys are setting the standard and we are behind, but there's so much more work to be done. My background comes, as I mentioned in the question I asked, from the DOT perspective. I grew up in Averill Park, New York, which is not far from here, moved to Watertown, New York, then moved to Long Island. My father was a regional director of transportation for both Watertown and for Long Island and New York City. So I got to ride in the plows and I got to investigate bridges and be part of the DOT experience. Little did I know I was going to go into groundwater as a profession, and I have been a hydrogeologist now for about 42, 43 years, and have worked up and down the eastern United States and internationally as well. Salt has become kind of my sidebar over the last couple of years, and part of it is because one of our clients in New Hampshire has suffered the consequences of what happens when we do not use salt smartly. Now that's something that you brought up, and I think that was mentioned right up in the front. And then Phil mentioned that which is measured can be improved. That is what I'm going to show you today, because we have a relationship of trying to maintain safety, but at the same time understanding that we are damaging the groundwater system. I'm going to present in New Hampshire, but we're damaging the groundwater system throughout the Northeast and wherever we're doing de-icing practices. This is something that I will share with you, that the #1 contaminant that we have in New Hampshire, and I deal with PFAS every day, is salt. That has contaminated more public and individual and community water systems than any and all of the other contaminants combined. So I'm going to walk through this. I usually use a pointer or a laser pointer, but unfortunately in this format you can't. So I may step away so I can point to one of these screens so you can see what I'm mentioning. The background for my discussion is the Merrimack Village District, which relies on groundwater to supply 1 billion gallons of water annually to over 9,300 customers. Over the past 30 years, sodium and chloride levels have continued to increase in all of the MVD production wells. Now, when I say Merrimack, this is just one town of about a dozen that I can put my finger on that this is occurring. It's obviously the most common de-icing agent used in the state of New Hampshire because the demand for roads and clear roads during and immediately after snow and ice is present every time. But as the percentage of a watershed increases with impervious cover, parking lots, roads, highways, more salt is added, more salt goes into the watershed, and as we know, salt dissolves very readily in the groundwater. So this is 20 years, I'm going to show you, that started off with New Hampshire in 1985, where we were measuring sodium in wells across the state. And you can see that the majority of the area had sodium less than 20. 10 years later, that map fills in a more dense red. And in 2005, we're seeing a majority of communities having sodium levels greater than 20 milligrams per liter. Now let me jump ahead to 2023. In 2023, we put this map together, DES put this map together to show that not only are we going above 60 milligrams per liter, we got a lot of communities that are going to 200 and above 200 milligrams per liter. And approximately 175,000 people in New Hampshire drink water that has 60 milligrams per liter of sodium in it today. Now, we have worked hard with DOT and various agencies to try to reduce salt. But the reality is that our salt use continues to increase and the salt loads continue to increase, in part because we've increased our impervious cover, in part because we've increased our use of salt. So what I'm talking about today, and you've heard this, and I don't want to beat this band too hard, but we have to change the culture of what we do. And I was so impressed with what Peru and Washington County and other communities are doing, because they've taken this by the horns and said, we are going to change the way we go. We're not going to just talk about it, we're going to actually do something about it. So I'm going to review where the levels in one local aquifer, and this is just one, but there are many in New Hampshire that are suffering in this way. And then I'm going to talk about what approaches we've used to try to help this matter. Now, New Hampshire DES did a nice job in breaking down where's all our salt come from. And in New Hampshire, we have about 50% of the salt comes from parking lots, and about 9% comes from state roads, and about 27% from municipal roads. Well, that's all good and right and helpful for a statewide issue, but when you have individual problems, it takes individual approaches to fix it. And I like the question that one gentleman raised. How do we prioritize where we reduce salt from the municipalities and from the state highways? So, sidewalks and roads shouldn't crunch and salt drifts are bad, right? Everybody knows this. We've talked about it, but this happens continuously. And I've now gotten to the point where every time I step outside, I call the person and say, wait a second, we just had a storm 3 days ago, and I'm still stepping on salt that you put down that's not doing anything but going into the groundwater system. I bring this up too because chloride does have a EPA secondary standard of 250 milligrams per liter, and EPA is recommended to keep the levels for drinking water down below 60 milligrams per liter. So just as a review real quickly, sodium and chloride levels are harmful to the environment and substantially contribute to stormwater pollution, adversely impairs surface water quality and is toxic to fish, impairs groundwater quality, it impairs wetlands and ecosystems, it increases the presence of invasive species, it increases corrosion on our vehicle fleets and equipment, it increases damage to highways and bridges, the ones we're trying to protect, and it adversely impairs drinking water. Okay, so all of these are common sense issues. Why isn't it that we are out there making this one of the highest priorities to reduce? It's almost beyond common sense that these salt issues are creating these problems, and yet we in New Hampshire continue to use more and more salt. Why is it important to drinking water? And I want to make sure everybody in this audience understands this. Treatment of sodium and chloride exceeds the cost for treatment of PFAS, VOCs, 1,4-dioxane, arsenic, metals, etc. Now that's staggering when you think about the PFAS issues that we're dealing with across the state, that the cost to treat sodium and chloride exceeds that of PFAS because we have to go to an RO as opposed to a carbon removal. So just to give you that point of view, I want everyone to walk away understanding that the cost of treatment for sodium and chloride is almost not possible. Why is it important to Merrimack and most communities? Well, they lost one production well due to elevated sodium and chloride that was producing 1,000 gallons a minute. The cost to this town was $2 million, all preventable, all been identified 10 years ago, but we couldn't get the curve to change. And now all the other production wells are still in play. And this is happening in New York, I can tell you, because I'm involved in some of them in New York as well. But here's what I want to show you how this works. So those blue areas that you see, the center one is a well called MVD3, you can see. Everything in blue is where the recharge area goes to these wells. So they have three sets of wells, three sets of areas, well fields. One in the north, MVD 4 and 5, that produce about 400 to 500 gallons a minute each. The ones in the middle, each one of those wells produced 1,000 gallons a minute, and the ones down the south about 500 gallons a minute. To give you an idea of what 1,000 gallons a minute is, it's 1.5 million gallons a day. So it's a big source of water for a community. The inventory of where we came up with how much salt was impacting that well came out to be 56% of roads where the salt load was going in, and parking lots were about 38%. Now, Phil Sexton is involved in a series of parking lots that we're concerned about in this particular area that we're requiring to reduce salt use. But this pie diagram is different than what I showed you statewide because in this particular area, the roads are the dominating factor. Now, I want you to see this as that blue area, again, is the watershed area, and that's the recharge area for these wells. The stars are the storm drain outfills. The yellow are the parking lots. And the red, the high line in red that you see, is the state road that goes into this interchange, okay? That would be a DOT road. And of course, there are residential sites as well, and the things you see there in blue are residential homes. What we commonly observe, and ironically, the water district their office sits at the interchange of where I just showed you where the state road intersection is, with spreader trucks spinning off excess salt at the end of the run or unloading their entire salt load before they went back to the shop because they were instructed not to come back with salt. Now, I'm not saying this happens everywhere, but this happens in this particular community. There are overlapping routes where one truck would come and then another truck would overlap, and a lot of the salt that they had on the road was getting plowed off and then resalted. So what we see in this watershed area that we were trying to stop are, salted parking lots like this. This is what we've taken pictures in the last couple of years. Well, that gives you an idea of what that looks like. That's an example of what you cannot do. We've got salt drifts and salt draining into the storm drains. We've got roads that you can see here that are all a part of this equation. So, all right, where are we going with this? So in 2011, I did a study that's determined that about 550 tons of salt were going into this watershed. And we brought the alarm, we sounded the bell, we said, look, we have got to change direction. We went to DOT, we went to the Public Works, we went to the parking lots, we went to everybody in the stakeholders meetings. We said, we've got to stop this. But look what happened. This is a tracking from 1992 to 2021, right? From 1992 to 2011, when we started the alarm bell, chloride was increasing in this well 9, almost 10 milligrams per liter each year. From from 2011 to April 2022, that chloride didn't go down in terms of how much it was going in. We went up to 13 milligrams per liter per year. And sodium didn't change, essentially. Sodium continued. But look where we're at. We're looking at 400 milligrams per liter of chloride and almost 180 milligrams per liter of sodium in a drinking water well that we've sounded the alarm on. The area to the north that I mentioned to you, which is the 4 and 5, you see the yellow all throughout there. Those are the areas where salt is applied, parking lots, roadways, etc. And what we've seen here is since 1992, really no change in the in the sodium chloride levels as they continue to increase. Now, I want you to look at this table because this blows my mind. This well, MVD3, that we had to take offline, had a sodium increase of 1,000% over time and 900% in chloride. 1,000% with the warnings out there. And this is why I say congratulations to Lake George, because you guys are taking this seriously and are making changes. So what are we doing in Merrimack? Well, we've made presentations like this one. We've presented the reduced salt case to the local businesses. We presented our case to reduce salt in the WAPAs to the DOT. We formed a stakeholders committee. We've been chatting about this for 10 years. We've promoted the use of brine, live edge plows, anti-icing, getting over other business to move in that direction. We received commitments from some of the largest parking lot owners to try to move towards no salt or lower salt. We've applied and received a grant to install signs so that the DOT and the public works could see when they're walking into the recharge areas. And we're monitoring continually. Well, here's the signs that we got done. So this is the wellhead protection area. This is the recharge area. You can see all the signs that we were able to put in. But the two signs that are the most important were for the DOT. And the DOT has spent a year not addressing what we've been asking is to put these signs in. And so we finally had to go to the legislature and say, we need to put the WAPA signs in place. So after all of this work, one would think, okay, we're going to make progress. We're doing well. Well, it does work. And so Lake George has a good example of that. I have a place that has worked as well. So you'll see the southern one that says MVD7, MVD8, and MVD6. A higher proportion of highways, but these are town roads, and the town changed the way they did their salting. And Home Depot said, okay, we're not going to put any more salt in our parking lots. And look what happens. We see a change in 2011 because if you think of an aquifer as a bucket with a hole in the bottom, right? You're putting salt in, but salt's also going out through the streams and out of the watershed. So there's always salt. If there's salt in your streams, it's going out. You're moving it through. You're flushing it out of the system. It's one of the great things about this contaminant is we control it as opposed to PFAS and some of our more challenging contaminants. This we control, and when we reduce the load, the concentrations in the aquifer start reducing. And you can see in this case, for the last 10 years, we've been seeing a reduction because people took advantage of the salt reduction procedures. But as you saw before, and I can't go back, the continuation of salting in this interchange has created even a worse problem. So I'm going to show you a picture. So you'll see that the well 3, and there's this interchange here that is part of the Industrial Boulevard, Industrial Drive in the Continental Boulevard. This is a DOT route. Up beyond is some Fidelity parking lots that Phil Sexton's working on to reduce salt use. And we were told, we had a meeting just recently with a DOT, and the discussion was, yes, we're using best practices. We're using best management practices, and because the division is, or the water department is right outside, they take pictures pretty regularly. And so this was a picture taken this year of what the DOT was doing. And I'm not trying to blame the DOT because this is a collaborative issue that we're trying to resolve. But what my point is that sometimes when we think we're doing the best things possible, the data that we're collecting, the scientific data that we're collecting shows that what we're doing is not really what we're saying we're doing is not really being effective, or we're not really doing as much as we think we're doing. So this scenario shows the scary part. Okay, in the last 3 years, in the area by this wellhead, that we took offline at a cost of $2 million to this community, each data point that you see here is a data point that is an average of 4 samples taken every season, so spring, summer, fall, winter. The average chloride over the last 3 years, since 2021, 2022, and 2023, has risen to 1,000 milligrams per liter in this aquifer. This is right now, with the highest measured at 1,200. Now, I mentioned to you the secondary standard for chloride is around 250 milligrams per liter. We're at 1,000 with measurements at 1,200. The sodium has reached 600 milligrams per liter. That's 10 times what the maximum level that EPA recommends for drinking. And it's all down gradient of these salted efforts. Now, as I showed you, 1992, we didn't have this problem. 2000, we didn't have this problem. 2011, we started alarming everybody. Now it's 2022, and we are in panic mode. Simply put, those that use salt need to reduce salt. And I would encourage the DOT in the state of New York to prioritize some of the communities that are suffering from high levels of chloride and sodium as part of their pilot tests, because there are communities like this that may end up saving a couple of $1 million. So what do we do to reduce the salt load? Okay, you know all this, I'm not going to repeat it, but we've got to use the anti-icing approaches. We've got to move towards brine and liquid agents like what Peru has been doing. We calibrate, we have to, and we have to have trained operators. Now, one of the things we've learned from our meeting with DOT recently is that they have 60 openings for employment. And I'm sure that's probably the case here. There's not enough workers to do the work. And so what happens is they sub that out. But the people that are subbed out don't have the necessary training to do the same salting. And we know that someone who's putting 500 pounds of salt per lane mile versus 130 might be thinking they're doing the same job, but they're not. And the training that's not there for these operators makes a huge difference. So I'm going to encourage you that everybody be trained in terms of what they're doing. And every plow driver in this room, I applaud you for being here, because that means you want to be educated. You want to know what it is to reduce salt. Congratulations to you guys, because it takes that kind of initiative. But in New Hampshire, one thing we have done, and Phil kind of alluded to it, is that there is a slip and fall policy that you cannot be liable in New Hampshire if you're snow pro trained, that you fall on a parking lot that's being maintained by a landscape contractor and they slip and fall and they get hurt, you cannot sue that contractor. The state has provided liability across the board for all contractors who are trained in salt reduction methods to not be held accountable. So where are we now? What are we doing? And now we've had to go, unfortunately, to the politicians. And that's the worst case scenario. But that's what we had to do. We had to write a letter to the governor. We had to write a letter to the commissioners and say, we have this problem. And when we presented this case, everybody gasped. Everybody gasped. It was exceptional. So now we're talking about, okay, we're going to require, in this case, because this happens to be part of the DOT, we're going to require subcontractors to be trained in the aquifer protection areas. And we're going to make sure that the signs get put in the wellhead protection areas. We're going to require that drivers understand what anti-icing means and not de-icing necessarily. And we're going to have the DOT cooperate, we're going to optimize, or they're going to be required to optimize plow routes. So we're now getting the legislature, the senators and the House reps engaged in helping this process. We have made the formal request now that DOT use brine in this particular area, because we know that brine works. And even though in our case we were told in the meeting 2 weeks ago or a week ago that brine does not work, we know it works. It works, it's safe, it's environmentally responsible, and it can save a substantial amount of money. And of course, what we want is to reduce the salt load. And lastly, I want to say, we applied with DES and EPA for funds to conduct a watershed management program. Now, we just found out last Thursday that we've been awarded a contract from EPA and DES. It's the first one in the country to focus a watershed management program on salt. Usually it's phosphorus and nutrients and other things. This is going to be on salt. And it will end up providing legal teeth for people to have to reduce their salt use. Now, I didn't want to go this route. We didn't want to do this because in 2011 we knew we were going down this path. But I'm sending out the alarm bells to everybody here in New York who is listening and elsewhere. If the alarm goes off, you've got to pay attention to it because it will have substantial consequences. And we in New Hampshire are working hard to try to overcome that, but it's more than just conversation. It's got to be something like Peru and Washington County and those municipalities that are going to say, wait a second, it's our community, it's our environment, it's our drinking water, it's our wells, it's our lakes, it's our rivers. We're going to do everything within our possibility to change this culture to reduce the salt use. So with that said, this is a bad example. I'm giving you one. We have a good example. I showed you what happens when you do the work. Salt loads go down and the water quality gets better. But that's all I have to say. So thank you.
Are there any questions? I'm told I need the microphone. Any questions? I do have one. Jamie, is this a TMDL that you're basically working on, a total maximum daily load kind of analysis?
We will be. We will be. That'll be part of the overall of this new program that's going to be started.
And could this lead to limits, or in New York State we call them SPEEDs, State Pollution Discharge Elimination System requirements, and NEPIs?
Yeah.
And would that result in something like that, do you think? Or?
That's what our hope is.
Okay.
Yeah, and particularly in this, in I'm not sure it'll be done on a regional basis, but EPA has never done this before, so we're kind of in the, we're in the exploratory realm. But the goal is to have some kind of legal teeth that says, all right, we need to have a better balance between salt and safety. Because in 1992 we were driving the roads and we were still safe. And we have additional roads and parking lots in there, but it's not, the math doesn't work out. The number of roads is not the absolute reason why we're seeing these salt loads going up. And as you can see, we were able to change the curve on a very congested highway that was right there with parking lots that changed their culture in using salt.
Thank you so much. That was exceptional. It was eye-opening, and I think it goes back to, again, the operators and others who are in this room that have taken it by the reins, right, are showing the difference that can be made without having to go to this step, which we don't want to. We don't want to do that either. We've done everything we've done in the basin in Lake George with no new policies or statute. It's remarkable, and it's a testament to our partners. But my question is, to what degree have you, I know you've reached out to and had community meetings, but to what degree have they been receptive to understanding of the problem and wanted to do something about it on their own? What has been the...
It's been a struggle.
Just to follow, why?
Yeah. So I can't answer that question. I don't understand why. There is a fear factor that going to other alternatives is not going to create a safe environment. But yet there has been plenty of opportunities to learn and understand that there are alternatives that are safe. And I think we're starting to turn the corner. Having Phil involved with one of the big parking lot owners in that particular region is going to help. I'm going to tap him harder to make them do more quickly. But I think that at the end of the day, it takes a collaboration, and that's why I asked the question about the collaboration between DEC and DOT. Is there a distinct and mandated, or maybe not mandated, is there a direction that says, okay, this is a problem, we're going to get together, and we're not going to talk about this once a year at a conference. We're going to actually talk about this all the time. This is going to be our goal. And that's what I'm trying to do with New Hampshire, is to say, okay, and I don't want to, and whoever's from New Hampshire is watching this on video, I want to make it clear that there are actions that have results and consequences. DOT does a great job in New Hampshire, and they do keep the roads safe. What I'm indicating is that in this specific area and others throughout, we can do a lot better, and we have to do a lot better. And so going back to your original question, it takes this culture change of enthusiasm, the enthusiasm that I forgot his name now, Mike Farrell has, about saying, wait a second, I'm going to try something new that's out of the box, and I'm going to do it as best I can and see what happens and make it work. And that kind of attitude is so important for everybody to have, because not everybody wants to do the new thing. They want to do what's easy. What's easy comes is what I did before. And so we're working on it, but I don't know, I don't have the answer, because oftentimes the money isn't coming out of their pocket. Right? A citizen who has a parking lot doesn't say, well, it's $2 million for the town. The town's got plenty of money. Well, the town doesn't have plenty of money. But anyways, that's kind of part of this problem.
Because unless, just quickly, that kind of initiative is taken, like Peru and Washington County and others, you know, a process as you're describing it is going to take a lot of time.
It is.
This isn't going to happen overnight.
We're going to see more millions of dollars
Exactly.
of impact.
Exactly.
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No other questions? Well,
I've seen your one graph that showed that you could have positive results with certain practices, and I was wondering, Chris, in terms of New York State's demonstration projects, is there a water testing overlay that's part of those pilots where they're going to test the efficacy of what they're doing?
I believe there was monitoring and water quality included in the pilot programs. I know there was up in State Route 86. I know personally along 9N that there was, because we have completed a 4-year study on that. And working with the department, there was findings of reduced application rates by the department. What we found is that there was increased application events, increase on going out, which led at times to increased salt loading in our streams. And that's something we're working with the department on. One other question, and then I think we will break for lunch.
Thank you so much, James, and thank you to everyone who's been a part of this so far. My name's Sawyer Bailey. I'm the director of an organization called 80K Action, and there's been a lot of talk about how do we take the pilots and how do we help the champions spread this work across the region and take it to scale. We've had a number of these conferences that fire us up, and to your point, how do we keep this going 365 days a year? And I know some of the folks here who are operators are going to be heading out for a demonstration in the afternoon, but I just want to draw attention to the privilege that 80K Action has had to try to support folks like Deb and like Mike and their team. Working with Phil Sexton and Wood Advisors, we're doing an intermunicipal community of practice to try to help these pieces of knowledge spread. And if anyone in this room is interested in being a part of it, whether you're in the Adirondacks or not, we want to involve you. This work is growing. We're taking Lake George's model and we're really trying to help it spread. So thank you, Eric, and thank you, Chris and LGA, because we want to be your partners in this. So please find our team. We want to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks. With that, we will break to lunch. Thank you, James. Really appreciate it.